again to discuss things.
Alright, hi everyone, welcome to another Geeky Gentleman character discussion. I am Sid Partu. Joining me today is Steve Baxi, as per usual, but as a special guest today is the Comics Kid 299, aka Ruben DeBoard. Ruben, why are you on this episode?
Because I like King Arthur and King Arthur related things, and we are talking about Merlin, who is a King Arthur related thing.
Yay, he is indeed. Now, interestingly, Ruben does a little webcomic strip all built around Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. And so Merlin is a recurring character, and I've read a couple of your strips with Merlin in him, and like I really feel I get the sense of things are going over my head, but one strip you did that I thought was pretty clever was there was something like about Merlin being at the Battle of Troy and like saving a baby from getting killed. Mm-hmm. And like he met the guy that was the baby and he goes, "You're welcome."
Yeah.
And I thought that was a really funny strip, and it seems like you have a very particular take and sense of who Merlin is.
Yeah, I kind of my take on the whole King Arthur thing for me is that I try to like take bits and pieces from different stories and then just kind of I blur it together for my own canon, if you will. So like in the Once and Future King, Merlin can time travel because he sends Sir Kay to have an adventure with Robin Hood. And so like I use that where like Merlin is going all over the place. Like he meets Emma Woodhouse from the novel Emma, and then he goes to Troy and stuff like that. So he's a time traveler. But then like in other stories, Merlin can see the future. And so I've worked it in that although he can see the future, he can't tell anyone what happens because if he can see the future and he doesn't prevent the fall of Camelot, then that makes him just a really terrible person. So I've got it so that although he can see the future, he's legally not allowed to say anything about it. So like I've just kind of I took that to mean that if that's the case, then Merlin would just be perpetually grumpy. And so I've kind of just got my Merlin is just like a really grouchy, like uncle kind of character. And so there's different interpretations of him. Like I'd say the closest to mine is like the Camelot TV series that was on Stars, but like I'd say most of the time he's just kind of like, you know, Obi-Wan Kenobi from A New Hope. Like just he's a really nice guy who you know guides the hero into this weird and wonderful world, and then once the hero is there and he's comfortable, then he kind of just fades off and he's no longer important in the story.
Fair enough. Steve, go ahead.
Sorry, I like that. I was just gonna say, if we're going to use Star Wars examples, I feel like for me, Merlin's is more like Luke in Last Jedi. Oh. Where like he's super wise and he trains and he knows what he's doing, but he's just a dick. Part of why I picked this and part of why I use that example is the first time I ever like encountered Merlin in a serious fictional sense outside of just knowing he's a wizard is the Mark Twain book. What is it?
A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court.
Yeah. I thought it was Kentucky. It's Connecticut, yeah. But a Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court. That's where I first saw it. And that Merlin is just like a drunken, crazy dude who's super superstitious about everything. I thought that was fascinating as a kid. And ever since then, I love the idea of Morgan Le Fay and Merlin being almost the same person. They're both just kind of evil. And King Arthur is almost a mitigating force between them.
Okay. And see, I don't know a lot about Arthurian lore and all that stuff. Like, you know, I know what everyone else knows. The Round Table, King Arthur, Camelot, Merlin's a wizard, Lancelot's a really good knight, stuff like that. That's really... You're a wizard, Merlin. That's the stuff I know. And yet Merlin's got this weird place in like just different magical stuff. Like, so often Merlin just kind of comes in as a writer's way to do like a cute little reference. Like I remember in in Justice League, the animated series, when we get Jason Blood's origin, it's Merlin that binds him to the demon and all that stuff. It's like, that's the only time he appears in the series and all that stuff. And then, it's really weird in the Harry Potter books and movies, when people are mad, they say Merlin's beard. Yeah. And I don't know if Merlin was a real wizard in the world of Harry Potter, like, who existed. Oh, he was. Okay.
Yeah, the books get into this, and I think Pottermore confirmed that he's like a Slytherin or something.
Oh, wow, that's crazy.
I don't know the full history of that, because I don't read Harry Potter like that. I just know that from reading the books as a kid, there is confirmation in at least a couple places that Merlin was an actual person.
That's hilarious, and I want to know more about that.
I want that movie trilogy. Forget Fantastic Beasts.
No, I really like the idea behind Fantastic Beasts. They're just fucking it up. Regardless, though, no, like there is like a legit interesting story to Merlin, and I don't know, maybe I'm the weird one, and I'd be more interested in a Merlin movie than a King Arthur movie. You know?
No, I agree with you completely.
Well, there was the Guy Ritchie movie that bombed horribly last year. They were planning for that to be like part of a 6-part series, and Merlin was completely absent in that movie. They mentioned him. So, like, if that movie had done financially well, I'm 100% certain we would have seen Merlin either in his own movie or he would have been a big part in one of the other movies.
Well, too bad.
Yeah,
it's not
exactly.
I didn't even see that movie, but that makes a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, it was weird because there was another King Arthur movie earlier that year too, right?
It was like
the exact same thing happened with Hercules like 2 years ago. Oh
yeah,
like 2-3 years ago they did the exact. There was a Rock Hercules movie, and like a couple months before that there was another Hercules movie. Yeah, I don't know why these things happen.
I think the King Arthur movie that wasn't Guy Ritchie was like almost a direct-to-TV thing. Like, it didn't hit the theater where I live, and I don't know anyone who watched the other one. But I remember before any of them came out, it was like there was like 3 King Arthur movies coming out in 1 year, and 2 of them were like very low budget, like actors you've never heard of before, and then there was the Guy Ritchie one.
Mm-hmm. It's funny when they do shit like that. But anyway, okay, so Merlin is this interesting idea, like he's kind of like the quintessential wizard for a lot of people. Do you agree with that, or do you think he should be like an extremely odd idea? Like he shouldn't conform to the stereotypes of wizarding? What do you guys think?
Both of you. You go ahead, Steve.
So, for me, I always thought Merlin probably should be, like, the most stereotypical of all wizards. I like Merlin to be kind of like... Merlin is to wizards what Dracula is to vampires. Like, there's an episode of Angel where someone asks him if he sleeps in a coffin, and Angel gets really defensive, and he says, no, that's just a myth popularized by hack writers. And I think Merlin's exactly that. Did either of you see Sorcerer's Apprentice?
No. The one with that with Nick Cage?
Yeah.
No, I didn't see it.
Okay, yeah. That's like the most forgettable movie ever. It's not bad, it's just super forgettable. But the one thing I do remember is that the wizarding in that movie is super goofy, and that's kind of what I think Merlin has, is that Merlin's not hip and cool. He's the guy that wore that really goofy hat and a really goofy robe, and no one entirely knows why, and he's kind of a dick about it. But everyone else follows from him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The way I see it is like all like in the webcomic you mentioned, I just look at like wizards are just weird people to like they do weird stuff, and they have their own little culture that runs parallel to like what's going on with the rest of the world. But Merlin is like, he's almost an outlier for them. Like, it's not that he's weird, but he's almost like he's just an outsider and doesn't quite get along with what the other wizards and witches are doing. That's kind of how I see him. But then, like I said, there's so many different interpretations. Like, you could almost like dissect each version that you see in like books and movies and say like, these are kind of doing the same thing over here, and then these are doing something a little different.
Now, it's, again, I don't know shit about Arthurian lore, so I'm probably going to sound like an idiot. So probably my biggest exposure to Arthur is the Disney Sword in the Stone movie, and I remember probably the best scene from that movie is the magic fight between Merlin and the sorceress.
Mm-hmm.
Does Merlin have like a proper villain or adversary magic user in the original lore, or is that something that like we've just kind of popularized over the years?
I don't remember the. Oh, you go ahead, Steve.
So I was just gonna say Morgan Le Fay, though, right?
Yeah. I don't remember the witch's name in the Sword and Stone, but Morgan Le Fay, in several different stories, like in the Excalibur movie from the 80s, Morgan Le Fay is his apprentice, and then she turns evil. And so there's her, and then Nimue, depending on what story you read, she betrays him and traps him in a cave, and she's also his apprentice. So, like, there's, those two.
Okay, that's fair. I'm just curious about that because I don't know enough about the character that I probably shouldn't be doing this discussion.
You're
so I'm gonna let.
It's fine.
Yeah, it's fine. So I got one more question that I'm interested in, and then I'm gonna let Steve kind of take the reins on this. If you were to cast Merlin today, any actor that you want, you can get. Who would you go with?
You go, Steve.
Colin Farrell.
Yeah, he'd be good.
Accent, drunk, hilarious, kind of a jackass. Yeah.
There was almost a King Arthur movie a few years ago. It had Jon Snow from Game of Thrones, and it had Joel Kinnaman was going to be Lancelot, and I think Gary Oldman was going to be Merlin in that, and I think that would have been really interesting. Like I think he would have been like the anti, like he wouldn't have been the goofy guy with the blue hat with the stars on it. Like he would have been very different than the typical Merlin ideal that we think of, and I think that would have been interesting to see.
Okay, that's cool. For me, maybe it's just because I actually like Dracula Untold, but Charles Dance. You mentioned he plays Tywin Lannister in Game of Thrones.
Yeah,
I'd be down.
Yeah, like he has that scene in Dracula Untold where he's the vampire in the cave, and he's like really fucking intimidating, but also really charming and cool to watch. And I don't know, I feel like that's kind of the right attitude, that he should be a little scary, but then just in an instant can soften up. And this actor has a lot of range, I think. So I think that could work, because he has some moments where he's trying to be nice and you almost buy it in Game of Thrones, which is neat. So yeah, that's all I got. Steve, you take us somewhere.
So part of the reason I want to talk about Merlin is just because I think like classical wizarding stuff's kind of fun, as opposed to the whole popularized young adult novel Harry Potter trend of like super complex mythologies and secret worlds and stuff like that. I kind of just like the really fun simplicity of Merlin has a whole bunch of power and he's magical and we have to save the world.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. There's just something about like pure and simple about that I really like.
Yeah, it's, we're all superhero fans. It's a lot like Golden Age superhero stuff, where it's like, this is the really basic stuff. Now let's tell some really fun stories with it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Steve, you mentioned that you had read Connecticut Yankee and King Arthur's Court. What are some stories that you've read that like have kind of gone in that direction that you like?
So I don't know if either of you are familiar with Matt Wagner's work, but in general, I really, really like him. He's one of my favorite comic book artists and one of my favorite comic book writers. One of my favorite things that he's ever done is a series called Mage.
Yeah. Which
is basically King Arthur, except it's just like reincarnated into the present day. And if I remember right, Merlin in that one is basically just like an old paraplegic that's kind of nuts.
Yeah, I read like the first, it was a big, huge book. It was like 200 or 300 pages long, and like everyone knew who the main guy was except for him for like a long time. I think I read that. I really liked it, but I haven't read the whole series because it's like a big, like 1,000-page epic, isn't it? Like,
yeah, it's pretty long. I haven't read all of it. I think it's still going at this point, and Matt Wagner just kind of like does it when he has free time.
Yeah.
But what I read of it as a kid, because it came out in like the late 90s, so it's been out for a while. But I really really like it. I love the almost sort of like Shazam style of it in a lot of ways. Like even King Arthur in that kind of looks like a mix between Shazam and Black Adam.
Yeah.
It's just a fun contemporary way of doing a good magic story. So that's a Merlin I really like. A lot of like classic Arthurian stories, I don't read a ton of those. My sister used to read a lot of King Arthur, and she knew a lot of that stuff. And every now and then I read something from her collection on it. But I don't have much like affinity for that stuff. I much rather just like read a lot of the either comic stuff or a lot of the adaptations. Like I remember the Sword and the Stone movie, watching that ridiculous amount as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
See, I didn't watch it that much. I watched it every like once or twice, I think, and just obviously the scene where he pulls it out of the stone, and then the magic fight are about the only things that stick in my head.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, Steve, you there?
I'm back. That was weird.
Okay, sorry about that, folks.
For me, I hadn't read a lot of King Arthur stuff like growing up, but I watched a lot. So like the big thing that got me into King Arthur was a mini series on the Sci-Fi Channel just called Merlin, and it had Sam Neill, I think, the guy from Jurassic Park. He was Merlin, and then Helena Bonham Carter was in it. She was Morgan Le Fay, but like virtually unrecognizable as the character, but she was, this was kind of before her career took off. Also, I don't remember her name, but the actress who played Cersei from Game of Thrones, she was in it. She was Guinevere. And this was like 97, so like really before her career took off. But that was like, for me, it hit a lot of the high points of the Arthur story that I feel like are the basics that most people probably know. And that was like the big thing that got me into the world of Arthur. And then like, other than that, there's a few movies, like Ian and I a few years ago talked about just the King Arthur. It was just called King Arthur with Clive Owen. And I still think that's probably the best King Arthur movie. But like for me, I jump into a lot of like TV shows and mini series and movies and stuff, and then I'm looking for like the one that does it best. And like I think the Camelot series on Starz was pretty good. It's a little hard to get into, but once you're into it, like it's really good. And I think that Joseph Fiennes, he's the brother of the guy who played Voldemort. I don't know how to say their last name. It's either Fiennes or
Fiennes.
Yeah. It's his brother, and he does a really fascinating take on Merlin, where he is just a complete jackass to everybody. But he's like, you almost get the feeling that he's manipulating stuff behind the scenes, but he's doing it for the good of the country, and like he's trying to turn Arthur into a better king. But then you get to see a softer side of him. Like he does a fantastic job playing it, and it's not like, again, like a lot of people I think were kind of upset that they didn't get somebody who was like 90 years old with a big long gray beard to play the character. But he looks young and hot and sexy, but like it totally works.
I want a hot, sexy Merlin.
Oh yeah, you need to watch that show then. Like it's called Camelot. Yeah, that was one of my favorites takes on the character.
That's fair. I know there's this debate, and you kind of brought it up in my head when you mentioned Voldemort. I know there's this debate among fantasy fans that the magic in Harry Potter is too easy, and I think that's a stupid complaint, but whatever. But like, how powerful a wizard do you think Merlin should be? Like, do you think he should be the most powerful wizard in history, or should he just be a pretty average wizard? He's just really, really important because he got involved in medieval politics.
I would say that last thing you said, where he's not like the Superman of wizards, but he was there at the right moment in the right time, and so he's like well known.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I would like to think of magic and wizarding, and if it's going to have to be a continuity, that gets better over time. So magic in Harry Potter is quote-unquote easy because Merlin spent 5 weeks hunting for berries and shit to do a simple spell. Fair.
I don't know. I've heard people make that complaint. Like the magic in Harry Potter is just too easy because the kids just learn how to say it and then it works. I'm like, Yeah, I guess, but there's still people discovering stuff, and I don't know. Should Merlin be this like ultra powerful wizard, and that's why he's known, or should he be just like a guy who is magic user, but more important because of what he did as opposed to what he could do?
Well, and more importantly, in most of the stuff I've read, at least, Merlin being magically powerful is almost never the point, and it rarely comes down to that. It's almost always Merlin's an advisor or a mentor. And he never even like straight up teaches magic either. He just kind of like explains things and guides people, and he's more of like a sage figure that just happens to do magic.
Okay.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Sword and the Stone movie. Yeah, doesn't he turn Arthur into a squirrel, trying to like teach him a lesson in that?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
He does a lot of that in the book, The Once and Future King, which I believe the first fifth of that book, it's actually divided up into sub-books. The first book of that book is what the basis of the Sword and the Stone, and he does different things where it's like he turns Arthur into a fish to teach him some story or to teach him a lesson about how to be a good king, even though Arthur doesn't know that that's the lesson he's learning. And like you said, like he's not teaching him magic stuff. He's just like a guide for like, this is a good political, a lesson you'll need to learn when you grow up. Like just a tutor, basically.
Okay.
Yeah, and as far as like Arthurian legend goes, I feel like Merlin almost always like tends to want to be on the periphery of things. Like his purpose is almost explaining to Arthur what his purpose is, and that's about it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, there's a lot of stories that I read where it's like Merlin is gone, like in Le Morte d'Arthur, which is like probably the biggest like source for Arthur stories, like, and it was written back in like the Crusades. I want to say no, it was written during the War of the Roses, and in that, Merlin is gone before Lancelot even shows up. So, like, he's not in the book for very long. But he's basically just there long enough to help Arthur establish the kingdom. And then once he's done that, then he just leaves. And a lot of other stories kind of go that route also, where in however long Arthur's reign is, Merlin is there for maybe, like, a fifth of it. Or maybe not even that.
Okay. That's disappointing, because I always liked the idea of Merlin kind of being around till after Arthur died, you know? Maybe I'm just weird like that, but I don't know. Something about that appeals to me.
There's been other stories that have done that. Did you ever watch the BBC series Merlin? Nope. Okay. I didn't really.
That one, isn't he?
Do what?
Isn't he immortal in that one?
Yeah. So I guess spoilers for that, but like at the very, like in the last episode, Arthur dies and then he floats off to Avalon just like he does in a lot of the myths. And then the dragon is telling him like, hey, peace out. You did what you were supposed to do. And then it shows Merlin like in the present day, there's like cars driving by where he just was. And then he walks by and he's an old man and he's wearing like, modern day clothes. And it's like, wait, where did that come from? Like, and I didn't watch the whole series because, to be honest, it wasn't very good, but that was one of those examples where Merlin is there throughout the whole reign, but that was not one of my favorite Arthur shows.
Fair enough. Okay, I don't know. Someone's got to help us, Phil. We still got like 7 minutes left.
Okay,
sorry, folks.
there was a book called The Crystal Cave, written in like I want to say the 1970s. It was by an author named Mary Stewart, and she I see her books at work all the time, and she doesn't just do fantasy. So I think it's kind of interesting that she did a fantasy story, but then she also does like stuff that's set in the present day that has no fantastical elements at all. But this book was about Merlin's life, like from when he's like a little boy who's like 5 years old all the way up to like helping Arthur's father, being a court advisor for him. And it's really fascinating because he has magical abilities in that, but a lot of the stuff that you hear about in these stories about Merlin is stuff that he doesn't do through magic. Like some of the stories about Merlin are that he set up Stonehenge. And in this book, he sets up Stonehenge, but he doesn't do it with magic. He does it using engineering. He's really good at math and science and stuff like that. And so at one point, he's about to tell this king who's trying to build a castle on top of an underground creek. He's about to tell the king what he needs to do, and then he like blacks out. And when he wakes up, one of his friends says that he just like prophesied this big long thing. And so he has magical powers, but he doesn't always have control of those powers. And most of the time, he's just doing stuff using his ingenuity. And when I first got into the book, I didn't think I was going to like that take at all, because I thought, you've talked about before about how like the movie Troy, how it takes away all of the fantastical elements of the Iliad, but it still ends up being a really good movie, I think. And this kind of does that too, where it takes away a lot of the fantastical elements, but it still leaves some of it in there. But then the stuff that you've heard of before in these old stories about Merlin, they're there, but just in a new context. And I think it's a really good place to go if you want to read about Merlin.
What's the book called?
The Crystal Cave.
Crystal Cave. Okay, I'll have to check that out.
That sounds really interesting, and I kind of need a book to listen to. I hope I can find an audiobook of that. You said something interesting about the BBC series that makes me wonder. So if you make Merlin immortal, do you think there is room to do like a modern day Merlin in the modern day story, or do you think that Merlin should only be connected to the the mythical Middle Ages?
Are you saying like how like the BBC Sherlock is like it's the story of Sherlock Holmes, but there's no it's completely set in the present day and there's no references to the stuff from the original series?
No, I think kind of what the BBC show was doing, wherein he had all the stuff with Arthur, but now he's in the present. Like, do you think there is room for something like that, or do you think that's just a bad idea that shouldn't be touched? That Merlin should be, left to die in the Middle Ages?
I think you could do it. The one of the myths about Arthur is that he isn't dead. He's just like in suspended animation, and that like he will come again when his country needs him. And so you could play around with that if you wanted to bring back Arthur into present day, or bring him back in like some point in the 20th century, and then have Merlin be there. I think it could be done. It might, it would be up to whoever's doing the story to execute it well. But I think that idea has merit, probably.
Okay. I was just curious because, I don't know, something about the idea of Merlin in the modern day sounds really interesting. I don't know enough about the character to say whether or not that would be something you should do,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't think Merlin in the present day is a problem. I think it would just be King Arthur in the present day that would be the problem.
Yeah.
Because I think Matt Wagner's mage is the exception that proves the rule, which is you just probably shouldn't do that. Like, medieval is medieval.
Okay.
And also with Mage, correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, because you may have read it more recently than I have, but with that, you don't even know it's a King Arthur story until like 200 or 300 pages in. Like, at first it's just this dude with a magic bat, and then it's like much later when it's like, oh, and she's the Lady of the Lake, he's King Arthur, etc.
Yeah, you don't find out the whole King Arthur Merlin thing until like at least halfway.
Yeah.
Damn. That's a lot.
Yeah, so
it recasts the whole series after that, but it takes a long ass time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Have either of you guys read? There's a comic book from the '80s called Camelot 3000 by Brian Bolland. I want to say.
Oh, yeah.
Or yeah, it was either Bolland or Talbot. Now I feel like an idiot because I can't remember which one of them did it.
It's Bolland. I remember going to a con where he signed my copy of The Killing Joke, and he was talking about that book.
Oh, okay. Have either of you read it?
Nope.
No.
Oh, it's set in the future, and it's a fun adventure story. It's King Arthur in space fighting evil aliens. The art is incredible. The story is, it's King Arthur in space fighting aliens, but Merlin's in that, but he doesn't play a huge role in it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, you're of the opinion then that Merlin really needs to be connected to Arthur, though.
Yeah, but there's Merlin stories that take place before Arthur comes in, and you can do stuff with that, I think. But I don't know how interested I would be if you said like let's do a Merlin movie and just completely take Arthur out of it. Like it could be good maybe.
I feel like the thing that can make that interesting is the idea of why he wants to groom a king.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think you could find that interesting is if he maybe started off where he's a guy who finds magic more important than politics, but suddenly starts to care about the world, but see that the ruling class doesn't. And he kind of gets that whole Socrates idea of if I can get them while they're young, I can teach them how things should be, and then they can make it happen. And so, like, you could have that be the inspiration for how he decides to get his hooks into Arthur, maybe? That could be interesting.
That would be, yeah. Somebody needs to do that. That sounds really good. Like, just hearing you talk about that, I'm like, oh, yes, I like that. And, I was thinking, like, when you said, like, can you do a Merlin story without Arthur? Like, back when the Gotham TV show first started, I remember somebody, it might have been the real Manos, and I don't remember who, but somebody said, like, it'll be really interesting if they could kill Bruce Wayne in, like, episode 3, and then just, like, completely, like, just blow everyone's mind. And it's like, oh, we're going to do something that you weren't expecting at all because you're expecting it to be a Batman prequel, and then if you kill Bruce Wayne, then it's no longer that. And that show still probably would have sucked if they'd done that. But if they did that with Arthur, where it's like you see Merlin and then Arthur's a little boy and it's like, okay, you're going to do the Arthur thing. And then like someone kills Arthur, that could be really interesting too. Like what does Merlin do when his big plan that he spent all these years putting effort into goes down the toilet? Like how is he going to save the country when Arthur's dead? Like that could be a really interesting character study for Merlin if something like that was to happen.
I don't know.
If
you're the Arthur fan and you would read it, then I'd say that's probably good enough.
I'm also weird because I'm not strictly speaking a purist because like there's so many different takes on the world of Arthur and different characters in Arthur, and none of them fit together. Like, with Greek mythology, it's remarkable how much of it does fit together. Sometimes you'll get contradictions where it's like, in this story, Theseus is a demigod, and this one he's not. But for the most part, it all seems to fit together really well, even though it was all done by different people over the span of, a couple hundred years. But like with King Arthur, it's like every story contradicts every other story. So for me, I'm just like, if it's done well, like I'm okay with it. Like I don't have to have it be done a specific way for the most part. Like there may be some things where I'm just like, no, don't do that. But for the most part, like if it's done well, even if it's not necessarily something I would have done, I'll still be open to the idea.
Okay, fair enough. All right, let's go ahead and move on to recommendations. I'm going to take the easy one and just say The Sword in the Stone because that magic fight is really, really entertaining from an animation perspective. Also, The Sorcerer's Apprentice, again, another Disney thing that's just a really good animated sequence. It's not really connected to Merlin, but it kind of is, so I'm gonna cheat and count it. And then the Justice League Unlimited episode where Merlin shows up for about 2.5 seconds. All right. How about you, Steve?
The Mark Twain book we were talking about earlier. Mage for sure, because I think that's a fairly accessible way to get into the whole legend. What else? I think that's probably about it.
Okay. And Ruben, how about you?
The Crystal Cave novel by Mary Stewart and Camelot, the Stars TV show with Joseph Fiennes and Jamie Campbell Bower and Eva Green. I'd say that show is just a really excellent. Like it's a short show. It's like 11 episodes long, but it's really good. And then that novel I think is a really good biopic on Merlin, if you will. But yeah, those two are mine.
Okay, fair enough. All right. Next week we will be beginning a new Geeky Gentleman theme month. I don't know if this is going to be a yearly thing or if this is just going to be a one-time go. But we'll be doing Geeky Gentleman Comedy Month. And so for character discussion, I'm actually really excited about this prospect. We're going to talk about Moe, Larry, and Curly, the Three Stooges. And of course, Shemp does not count.
Wasn't there?
Maybe
Wasn't there another one? A fifth one?
briefly when Curly got cancer. Or was it cancer? No, it was a brain disease. Anyway, yeah, that'll be fun and then sad, but still fun. All right, so everyone, thanks very much for watching. Until next time, I'm the Philosopher.
I'm the Exile.
And I'm the Comics Kid 2099.
And we are your geeky gentlemen. And we will be discussing things.